Hey, dear traveler. Welcome to Whispers of Sleep, your little corner of calm where soft rain meets soft memories. Tonight, we'll slip into a story. A gentle one, about a bar tab that was paid twice. And a love that never asked for much, except to be remembered. If you're ready, just let your body relax. Let the background rain soothe your senses, and my voice guide you slowly into dreams. Have you ever kept a receipt? Not because of the amount, but because of the moment it held. Let's begin. Part 1, The Receipt in the Diary. I never meant to open that old diary. Not really. It was just a quiet Thursday night. The kind that tastes like slow jazz and candle wax. You know, the kind when the city feels a little too tired to be loud, and you find yourself craving a drink not to celebrate, but to remember. I came to Hollow and Oak, the little wine bar 2 blocks from my apartment. It's tucked between a flower shop and a tailor who's never open. The windows are always foggy with old breath and the hush of stories that don't want to go home yet. Just a glass of the Viognier, I told the bartender. And he nodded like he remembered me, but not really. I sat by the window. There's always that one stool that creaks. I kind of like it. Makes it feel like the bar remembers you even when people don't. Anyway, I had this tote bag with me. You know, the kind full of receipts and paperback books with sand still between the pages. I reached in for my journal and there it was. A slip of paper, yellowed at the edges. Folded once, just neatly enough to feel like it had meaning. I unfolded it with the kind of care you give to old love letters even though it wasn't T1. It was a bar tab. 10 years old. I recognized the name of the place, the Iron Lantern. God, I hadn't thought of that bar in years. The date, August 14th. My birthday. 2 glasses of Malbec. A small plate of olives. And at the bottom scrawled in blue pen, barely legible. Paid twice. That's it. No signature. No name. Just those words. I don't know why that little line knocked the wind out of me. But it did. Maybe because I remember that night like I remember the scent of someone who once broke your heart, unexpectedly vivid. I sipped the wine, just once, and whispered into the glass like it could answer me. Do you remember it too? Dear traveler, have you ever kept something without knowing why? A receipt, a key, a voicemail that plays in your head even when the phone's been dead for years. Sometimes we hold on to pieces of a moment, hoping they might stitch themselves into answers someday. And that receipt, that tiny, insignificant scrap of paper, it was my beginning. Or maybe the ending I never quite finished. So if you're still awake, my friend, come sit with me a while longer. Let me tell you the story behind that bar tab. The man who paid for it twice. And what it cost both of us, in the end. Part 2, the night we first met. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I almost didn't go. It was one of those early autumn nights when the air smells like cold wood and the wind carries the first hint of regret from summer's end. I had just come from work, heels in my bag, flats on my feet. Makeup smudged the way it always is by 7 p.m. And I was lonely. Not the kind of lonely that makes you cry, but the kind that makes you want to sit somewhere unfamiliar and pretend to be someone else. The Iron Lantern wasn't a place I'd ever been. I'd passed it once or twice, sure its windows always foggy. That soft amber glow spilling out like warm honey on concrete. I pushed open the door and was surprised by the quiet. The hum of conversations, soft jazz on vinyl. The clink of glass against wood. It wasn't loud. Just human. That kind of noise that makes you feel less like a ghost. I sat near the end of the bar, away from the couple in the corner who looked like they were arguing about nothing and everything all at once. The bartender asked me what I'd have. I asked for a glass of the house red. I remember watching him pour it. Steady and slow, like it mattered to him. And then he sat down. To my right, one seat over. Close enough that I could hear the scrape of his sleeve against the bar stool. A gray sweater. The soft kind with rolled cuffs and a tiny hole near the elbow. His hair was dark, messy in that way men pretend they didn't plan. And his nose. It had this perfect arch to it. Like it was drawn on purpose. He ordered a 12-year scotch. Neat. No hesitation. The bartender didn't even ask questions. I didn't mean to look. But he turned to me and smiled just a little. Like he was already in on a joke I hadn't heard yet. You don't look like you're from around here, he said. Neither do you, I replied. More bravely than I felt. We didn't exchange names at first. Isn't that funny? There are people you tell your whole life story to before you even learn what they're called. We talked about books, music. He asked if I liked autumn, and I said I liked the way it smelled. He said it smelled like goodbyes and possibilities. I think that was the moment. The one where something shifted. There was a light above us that kept flickering. Every few seconds, it buzzed and dimmed like it was deciding whether or not it wanted to stay. He joked that it was trying to warn me. I told him I was never good at listening to warnings. We didn't kiss. Not that night. But when I stood to leave, I felt it, that weight in the air. Like we'd both dropped something we didn't know how to pick back up. I paid for my drink. And I think he watched me walk out. Or maybe I just hoped he did. Dear traveler, have you ever met someone whose voice you remember more clearly than their name? someone who made you feel like you were already a memory while you were still in the moment. That night didn't change everything, but it made everything after echo a little differently. And that was how it started. A grey sweater, a neat scotch, and a light that couldn't decide if it wanted to stay on. Part 3. A conversation that went too deep. There are some nights you never expect to remember, but they remember you. They come back in fragments. A certain laugh, the way a shadow moved across a table, the warmth of a sentence said at just the right moment. That night with him was one of those. Just one night. That's all it was supposed to be. And yet, somehow, we unfolded like pages from the same forgotten book. I remember his voice, calm and steady, as if he spoke not to be heard, but to understand himself. He asked me how long I'd lived in the city. I told him I wasn't sure I had. Not really. Living felt like a generous word for what I'd been doing. He smiled with his eyes before his lips. I liked that. It made me feel seen without being watched. Then I asked him about regrets. I didn't mean to. It just slipped out soft, like a leaf falling into water. He said he had one. Just one. That he let something good go because he thought time would wait for him. And then he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because pain, when it's worn too long, becomes familiar enough to joke about. I told him about the cottage I never bought, the poem I never sent, the man I almost married. He listened as if it all mattered. As if I mattered. And somewhere between the fourth sip and the fifth, I forgot to lie. I told him about my mother's quiet hands. About the first time I realized I was afraid of silence. About the dream I had of Paris. And how I never got further than the airport. He told me about the brother he hadn't spoken to in 8 years. About the time he almost drowned as a boy. About how he sometimes wrote letters he never sent, just to get the words out of his chest. We weren't supposed to get that far. Two strangers nursing drinks on a quiet Tuesday night. But it felt safe. Like something in us recognized something in the other. He said, "You make it easy to speak in full sentences." And I replied, "You make it feel like someone is still listening." It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something older. Slower. Like trust stitched together over the course of one long breath. When the bar grew quieter, and the bartender began wiping the same glass twice, I realized hours had passed. We had spoken through time like it wasn't even there. I stood to leave, again. My coat slung over my arm. My phone forgotten in my bag. He looked at me and said, "Some people are meant to pass through. And some leave footprints." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. We didn't exchange numbers. No promises. Just a glance, A pause. And that impossible feeling that something meaningful had just occurred. That night, I walked home slower than usual. The streets were half lit, and the city for once felt like it knew how to be quiet. Funny, isn't it how a single conversation can feel heavier than a history? How sometimes the people we speak to for only a few hours live in us longer than the ones we've known for years. Part 4. The email he never replied. I remember the night I wrote it. The night I sat there, fingers hovering over the keys, heart thudding louder than the tapping of my thoughts. It had been weeks since that night in the bar. A strange feeling lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't leave, even after I turned the corner. I'd thought about him every day since, though I hadn't told anyone. What could I say that I was thinking about someone I'd only met once? Someone who probably never thought of me again. It wasn't that I had fallen for him. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was the way he had listened. How he had made me feel like I was heard in a world where everyone was too busy talking. I sat there, glass of wine untouched, just looking at the screen, wondering how to start. How do you begin something that wasn't meant to start? How do you ask a question you know won't be answered? In the end, it wasn't much. Just a simple message, telling him I'd thought of him. That I hadn't forgotten. And that I didn't know why, but I felt the need to send it. I wrote the words, pressed send, and then I waited. 4 hours. Days. But the reply never came. Silence. A silence that stretched long enough to fill the room with an echo. I told myself it didn't matter. That I wasn't expecting a response anyway. That it was just a message, nothing more. But every time I checked my inbox, a tiny part of me still wondered. It wasn't the silence that hurt. It was the finality of it. The fact that I had reached out, and he hadn't. That feeling of being forgotten. A little lost in the crowd of life. Days turned into weeks. And life, as it tends to do, continued without me asking for permission. The world was busy, moving, spinning. And yet, sometimes, when everything was still, I would think of him. I wondered where he was, what he was doing. Did he ever think of me? Had he even noticed the email? I suppose it doesn't matter. Not really. It's just one of those things that happens, isn't it? One of those moments where you reach for something, and it slips through your fingers, like sand. And yet, I can't help but wonder. What if he had replied? What if he had said something? Anything at all? But that was the thing about him, wasn't it? He was always somewhere between the quiet and the loud. Always just out of reach. I remember one of the last things he said to me, before we parted ways. Sometimes, the quiet answers more than words ever could. I think I understood what he meant now. Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes, it just means there's nothing more to say. So I've learned to live with it. The silence, I mean. I've learned to accept that sometimes things just don't get an answer. And yet, every now and then, when I'm sitting by myself, with a glass of wine in my hand and the world outside my window, I think of that email. I think of him. And for a moment, the silence doesn't feel so heavy. It just feels real. Part 5. Years that drifted. Time has a way of doing that, doesn't it? Of pulling you in directions you never expected. I remember thinking that once, a long time ago, when I was younger and still full of those wild, uncertain dreams. I could have never imagined that years would pass and my life would unfold the way it did. I got married, moved to another city, built a life. A new life. A different life. One I never thought I'd be living. And somehow, through it all, he became nothing more than a fading memory, like the last traces of summer that slip away with the first cold breeze of autumn. Just a distant echo. But I won't lie and say I didn't think of him sometimes. In the quiet moments, when the world was too busy to notice, I'd catch myself thinking back to that night in the bar, to his voice, soft and steady, like something familiar, but foreign all the same. Years passed, as they always do. I settled into the rhythm of life, as we all do. You start to believe that the present is all there is. That the past is just, well, a dream that didn't quite happen the way you thought it would. But then, there would be a song on the radio. A smell in the air. A taste of something sweet, and I'd find myself back there, at that bar. Back to that night when everything seemed possible, when we could have been anyone, anywhere. It was strange, you know. How quickly everything changes. How life just pulls you along, like leaves caught in a breeze. You don't realize how much you've let go of until it's too late. I don't think I ever truly forgot him. I just stopped reaching for him. Life was too full of new things, new people, new moments. And sometimes, when you're busy with all of that, the past becomes less important. It doesn't fade away, but it becomes quiet, like the sound of an old song you don't play anymore, but still know all the words to. I guess it was like that with him. I didn't think about him every day. But sometimes, when the night was quiet, and everything felt still, I'd think back to that night in the bar. To that fleeting moment of connection. I think, in a way, it was the kind of thing you carry with you forever, even if you don't talk about it. It's funny, isn't it? How life moves, and we move with it. How we can change so much, but still be shaped by the things we thought we'd forgotten. I thought I had moved on. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I'd find myself wondering. Wondering about him. About us. But it was a dream. wasn't he it? One of those things that only makes sense in the moments you're living them. And once it's over, you're left with a memory. A small piece of something that never quite was. And yet, it's funny. I don't think I would ever want to forget it. Even though it was brief, and though it didn't last, it was real, at least for a moment. A moment in time that will always belong to me. But as life drifted on, I kept moving, too. And the memory of him became a quiet companion, tucked into the corners of my mind, like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. One I would never forget, even if I never saw him again. Part 6. A familiar name at the bottom of a list. It was one of those mornings when everything felt quiet. The kind of quiet that fills the spaces between breaths. I was going through some work files, something mundane. Nothing important, really. Just the usual daily routine. I didn't expect anything to catch my attention. I didn't expect anything to pull me out of the haze of my thoughts. But there it was. A name. At the bottom of a list. Just a name among others, but somehow, it stopped me. A name I hadn't seen in, what, 10 years? The kind of name that doesn't just fade away, no matter how much time has passed. His name. I stared at it, almost as if I couldn't breathe. As if seeing it in black and white brought everything back. All the things I had tucked away, those quiet memories I had tried to forget, they resurfaced in an instant. Like a dream you thought was lost, only to find it waiting for you, patiently, in the corners of your mind. I had no reason to expect his name to be there. And yet, there it was. A reminder of something I thought I'd left behind. It was like a gentle pull, as if the universe was saying, you thought it was over, but maybe it wasn't. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. I wondered if I should even call. If I should even acknowledge this thread of fate that had woven its way back into my life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, was asking me to remember. So, I clicked the name. I read it again. Slowly, as if it would disappear if I didn't hold on to it tight enough. He had changed so much, I thought. He must have. It had been years. He was probably not the man I remembered. People change, don't they? But there it was, the same name, the same feeling. Like a familiar song you hadn't heard in ages but still remembered every note. I wasn't sure if I should feel excited or afraid. But somehow, it didn't matter. The moment had already passed, even before I'd realized it had arrived. I thought about the years that had slipped by. All the changes, all the things that had happened since we last spoke. I had built a life, just like I always thought I would. A life full of the usual things: work, family, friends. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And yet, his name at the bottom of the list had shaken something loose inside of me. Maybe it was the feeling of unfinished business, or maybe it was the thought that some things are never quite as easy to forget as we hope. Either way, it didn't matter. I couldn't undo the past, but seeing that name again made me realize just how much I still carried with me. I clicked away from the file, moved on with my day. But the name lingered, like a whisper in the background. I don't know why I didn't reach out. Maybe I was afraid of what might happen if I did. Maybe I was afraid of opening a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through again. So, I let the name sit there, a gentle reminder. A thread of the past woven into the present, delicate and fragile. I don't know if I'll ever reach out, but I can't help but wonder what would happen if I did. Would he remember me? Would he be the same man? Would we pick up where we left off? Or would it be a different kind of encounter, one shaped by all the years that had passed? I suppose I'll never know. But I can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, I was meant to find his name on that list. Part 7, A Business Meeting with History. It's funny how life works sometimes. You think you've moved on, buried things that were meant to stay in the past. And then, one day, you find yourself in a meeting, and there he is. Across the table. Not the man I remembered. He's older, of course. We both are. But there's still that something in his eyes, that flicker of recognition, like a spark that hasn't gone out. I wasn't expecting it. How could I? It's been years, after all. So much time. And yet, the moment I walked into the conference room and saw him sitting there, a part of me froze. Like time had paused, just for a moment, just enough to remind me of everything I thought I'd left behind. We exchanged pleasantries, of course. The usual formalities. No one would know that there was anything more between us than business. And I suppose there wasn't, at least, not anymore. But still. His smile was polite, professional. But his eyes, they were a different story. They had a quiet intensity, a kind of knowing, as if he could hear the silence between us, feel the weight of what was left unsaid. And in that moment, I realized that some things, no matter how much time has passed, will never fully fade away. I didn't bring up that night. And neither did he. We were too careful, too aware of the delicate line we were walking. We were professionals, after all. But I could feel the tension, like a thread connecting us that neither of us dared to pull. It wasn't a long meeting. Just a couple of hours, filled with the usual back and forth of ideas and numbers. But somehow, it felt like more. Like everything that had happened between us was sitting just below the surface, waiting to rise to the top. At one point, I caught him looking at me, really looking at me. Not the way someone looks at a colleague, but the way someone looks at a memory, a moment in time that refuses to be forgotten. His gaze lingered just a little too long, and I felt my heart give a small, unexpected lurch. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. We simply moved on, as if nothing had changed. But I could feel it. The unsaid words between us were louder than anything we'd spoken aloud. When the meeting finally ended, we shook hands, of course. A firm, business-like grip. But there was something in that touch, something that lingered long after it was over. And when I turned to walk away, I felt him watching me. I could feel it like a weight on my back. A quiet reminder of everything we never said. I don't know why we didn't talk about that night. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe we were both afraid of reopening a door that had been carefully closed. But part of me wishes we had. Maybe if we had, we could have finally put it to rest. But then again, maybe some things are meant to stay unspoken. Maybe some things are better left as quiet memories, tucked away in the corners of our minds, like a dream that fades when we wake up. And perhaps, that's how it should be. I'm not sure. But as I walked out of that meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just walked away from something important. Something that had been with me for so long, but I hadn't known how much I still carried it. Until now. Part 8, the second bar. Same feeling. We were sitting in that old, familiar bar again, though this time it was a little different. It wasn't the same bar we had shared those quiet nights in before, but it felt like it. The atmosphere, the dim lights, the soft hum of the conversations around us, it all felt like a faint echo of the past, and for a moment, it was hard to tell whether I was here in the present or back there in time. He had suggested this place. I hadn't even thought to question it. It was as if we both knew that this bar, any bar, really would never feel like home to me without him. Not after all those years of drinks shared, of laughter, of moments that once felt so effortless. I hadn't meant to suggest this, to pull us back into this tangled thread that had always bound us, but somehow, the decision had already been made. In his eyes, I saw a reflection of the same feelings that had never fully gone away, even if we both pretended they had. He had ordered the same drink, the one we always used to order when things felt easy. And I followed suit, not out of habit, but because it felt right, in a way that nothing else seemed to. The bar was quieter now than it used to be. Fewer people were crowding around the counter, and the music was softer, more subdued. But the smell of the place, the mix of old wood and bourbon, the faint trace of memories in the air hadn't changed at all. And neither had the feeling between us. As we sat there, I could almost feel the weight of the past settling over us again, like an old, worn-out coat that we had put away long ago, but that was still warm and comforting. We didn't speak at first. Maybe we didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with 1,000 unspoken things, and I didn't mind them anymore. Maybe I never had. He looked over at me, his eyes soft but still carrying that same curiosity, the same hunger for answers that we'd both been too afraid to ask for so long. And I felt something stir inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. something I thought I had let go of. "You know," he said, breaking the quiet, his voice smooth, like the warm amber of his drink, "I always thought we'd be able to pick up where we left off." The words hit me in a strange way, like a whisper of something I hadn't been prepared to hear. They weren't a promise, not exactly. But they held the weight of a truth we both had avoided for too long. I took a deep breath, the kind that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside. "I thought so, too," I said, my voice quieter than I meant for it to be. It sounded almost like a confession, though I hadn't meant it that way. We both sat there for a while, neither of us sure how to bridge the distance between then and now. The bar seemed to hold its breath with us, waiting for us to find the right words, the right moment. But there were no right words, not anymore. Only the truth, heavy and raw, sitting between us like a familiar guest who had overstayed their welcome. We talked, eventually, but it wasn't about the things we used to talk about. It wasn't about the small things, the mundane, or even the big things that had once seemed so important. It was something else, something unspoken in every sentence, something that neither of us could quite grasp, but that we both knew was there. And as the evening wore on, I realized that this wasn't about finding closure. It wasn't about answers, or even about fixing things. It was about the feeling that no matter where we went, no matter how much time passed, there would always be this thread between us, always pulling us back, even when we thought we'd let it go. When the night finally ended, and we parted ways, it felt the same as always. Like we were two people caught in the same moment, two people who had never really left that first night at the bar. It was as if time had folded in on itself, and we were just picking up from where we left off, in the quiet, comfortable way we always did. I walked away that night with the same feeling I always had when I left him. A kind of sadness, mixed with a quiet peace. A sense that maybe some things, no matter how much time passes, never really change. Part 9, the tab that was paid twice. I tried to gather my things, my mind still lingering on the conversation we just had. There was a quiet thrum of regret in the air, the kind that follows when you say too much but not enough, when 1,000 thoughts race through your mind but no words come to fill the silence. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, really. Something to hold onto, maybe. Something to make sense of all this. I stood up slowly, the warm glow of the bar around me starting to feel a little too heavy, a little too familiar. My heart was still beating a little too fast, my thoughts tangled in that web of what-ifs and what should have beens. Maybe I needed to leave, maybe I needed to let go of the weight of this place, of him. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to be the one to walk away again, not when everything still felt so unfinished. I approached the bar, the soft clink of glass and the hum of low conversations surrounding me as I reached for my purse. The bartender was polishing a glass, his movements smooth and rhythmic. As I stepped up to him, I could see he was already looking at me, as though he'd been expecting me. "I'll take care of it," I said, pulling out my card, my hand trembling slightly. I didn't want to think about the evening, about the strange weight that had settled between us, or the quiet goodbye that hadn't really been a goodbye at all. I just wanted to move past it, to close the door on that chapter and let it rest. But the bartender shook his head with a soft smile, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't place. "No need," he said, his voice low. "Someone already paid." The words stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't like the bar was packed, and there was no one around who seemed to have noticed. I blinked, the weight of the words sinking in slowly. "Who?" I began to ask, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid a small, folded receipt across the counter to me. It was an old receipt, the kind that had faded edges, worn from being kept too long. I picked it up carefully, and my breath caught in my throat when I saw the writing on it. "To her, always." I didn't need to look twice. It was his handwriting. The kind of letters that still had a way of making my chest tighten, even after all this time. My eyes burned, the familiar sting of unshed tears threatening to spill over, but I blinked them back. I hadn't expected to feel this way, not now, not after everything that had happened. But there it was, the past, coming back in a way I couldn't ignore. The bartender gave me a small nod, like he understood exactly what I was feeling, and I managed a shaky smile in return. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He only smiled and turned away, giving me the space I needed. I stood there for a moment longer, the receipt still in my hand, my mind spinning. I hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be reminded of how much of the past had stayed with me, how much of it still clung to me, even though I thought I'd moved on. That small gesture, the tab, the words had brought everything rushing back, all the memories, all the things I thought I'd buried deep enough to forget. But maybe you don't really forget things like that. Maybe you just learn to live with them, tucked away in the corners of your mind, like that old receipt, faded but never fully gone. I walked out of the bar, the cool night air hitting my face like a sudden splash of reality. The streets were quieter now, the usual noise of the city fading into the distance. But in my mind, it was anything but quiet. The past echoed with every step I took, and I could feel him with me, as though he was still right there beside me. I looked at the receipt again, my heart aching with the weight of it. To her, always. Always. That simple phrase, something so small, had carried so much. I wasn't sure what it meant anymore, or if it even mattered. But somehow, it felt like the last piece of the puzzle I didn't know I was still holding. I couldn't help but smile a little as I tucked the receipt into my pocket. Maybe some tabs were meant to be paid twice. Maybe some things just needed time to come full circle. Part 10. The letter in the bottle. I had forgotten, for a while, how this place had always been a quiet sanctuary for me. The bar, with its worn wooden counters and the soft amber glow of the lights, had a way of holding memories in the air, like the scent of aged whiskey. Even now, as I sat there, the past was so alive in a way that almost seemed like it never truly left. The bartender had long since gone, and I was the only one left in the bar. I was half drunk, my thoughts wandering back through the foggy memories that had surfaced with every sip, with every quiet moment. It was only then, after all this time, that I realized I had been avoiding the real reason I'd come here that night. I wasn't just here to drink, to pass the time. I had come because of that receipt. That small, faded ticket that had sparked something deep inside me, something I couldn't shake. And as I stared at the empty glass in front of me, the weight of it all began to settle, like a heavy fog. Maybe that was when I noticed the bottle. It was sitting in the corner, near the old shelves of dusty bottles, an unassuming thing among the clutter. The kind of bottle you might overlook if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. Maybe I had been all along. I got up, my legs unsteady, the slight buzz in my head making the room spin just a little. But I walked over to it anyway. The bottle, a simple glass vessel, stood out against the clutter like it had been placed there intentionally. When I picked it up, I could feel the weight of it, the way it seemed almost waiting. There was something inside. A folded piece of paper. I held the bottle to the light, squinting at it, unsure whether I should open it. But something deep inside told me I had to. I pulled out the paper, unfolding it slowly, my heart beating faster with each motion. The handwriting was familiar. And in an instant, I knew it was his. His precise, careful strokes that I had never quite forgotten, even after all this time. The letter was short, just a few lines, but those lines seemed to stretch out forever. I could hear his voice in my mind as I read. I've never stopped thinking about you. Not for a day, not for a moment. You were always there, even when I couldn't be. If you ever find this, know that it was never over for me. I blinked, my chest tightening. The words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. A lump formed in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. He had left this here, all those years ago. He had left it for me, hidden in the place where everything had started. A slow, bitter laugh escaped my lips as I leaned against the bar. 10 years. A decade of silence, of distance, and yet here I was, holding this letter like I was still waiting for him. I wasn't sure whether to be angry, sad, or relieved. The confusion swirled in my chest, an uncomfortable mix of old feelings I thought had long been buried. But there was one thing I couldn't deny. This letter was a confession, a message from the past that had come back to claim its place in the present. A message that reminded me that nothing, not even time, could really erase what we had shared. I sat down again, the bottle in front of me now, the letter resting on the counter like a fragile secret. I wasn't sure what to do with it, but I knew one thing for sure. The past wasn't just a memory anymore. It had come back to me, in the form of ink and paper, in the form of a letter in a bottle that had somehow survived the years, waiting for me to find it. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was the closure I didn't know I needed. Or maybe it was just another chapter in a story that was never truly finished. I couldn't say. But as I stared at the letter in my hands, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was time to see what happened when you finally opened up the bottle. Part 11. The rain came after. It had been days, maybe weeks, since I found that letter, but I was still sitting here. Sitting in the same seat he used to occupy, staring out the window. The rain had started falling in steady, rhythmic sheets, like the world outside was trying to wash away something long overdue. I had become almost numb to it. The sound of the rain tapping against the window, the soft hum of the bar in the background. The world outside felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I wasn't sure why I came back here. Maybe I was trying to make sense of it all, to trace the lines that connected this moment with the last time he had been here, the last time we had been here. It felt like something had shifted in me that night, something I couldn't quite put into words, something heavier than just a memory. The bar was quiet, almost too quiet now, and I could feel the emptiness stretching around me. No one else was here, just me and the sound of rain. The letter from the bottle was still folded in my purse, as if I was keeping it close for some kind of comfort, like a secret that only I could understand. But I wasn't sure what comfort it was offering. It didn't feel like closure, not exactly. More like an invitation to something that was still unfinished, like I was meant to return to it somehow. I took the letter out now, my fingers trembling just a little as I unfolded it again. It had the same effect on me each time I read it. A strange combination of nostalgia and longing, of things left unsaid. I could almost hear his voice in my mind as I read the words, and it took me back to the days when he was still here, still real. I hadn't thought of him in years, at least not this way. I wasn't sure what I was looking for in that letter. Maybe I thought I'd find something I had missed before, some clue that would help me understand why we never quite finished our story. But there was nothing new this time. Just the same words that had stayed with me all these years. It was never over. The rain outside only seemed to grow louder, filling the room, drowning out the space between his words and my thoughts. I felt a sudden urge to write. It was as if the letter had unlocked something inside me, something I hadn't let myself feel in far too long. I grabbed a napkin from the bar, the soft paper crinkling under my fingers as I began to write. It wasn't much, just a few lines, but it was all I could manage. I wrote, almost as if I were speaking to him, trying to find the words that had been lost all these years. I don't know how to let go of this, of you. I've carried it with me, in the quiet places, in the spaces where no one else could see. And even now, after all this time, I don't know if I want to. Maybe that's the hardest part. That I'll never really know what could have been. I paused. It felt strange, like I was talking to someone who wasn't there. My pen hovered over the paper for a moment, as if waiting for something else to come. But nothing did. The words on the napkin felt like they were enough, like they were everything I could give him now. I looked out the window again. The rain was still coming down, but now it felt different, less like a storm and more like a quiet surrender. Maybe that was all I could do. Maybe that was all we could do, in the end. Let it rain. Let the time pass. Let the things we couldn't say fall away like drops of water on glass. And maybe one day, we'd see each other again without the weight of what was left unsaid. But tonight, for now, I was alone with the rain. And that was enough. I folded the napkin, slipping it into my purse alongside the letter. There was something comforting in knowing I had said what I needed to say, even if it wasn't to him. The words felt like a step forward, a way of letting go, even if I wasn't ready to let go completely. Maybe some things were just meant to stay in the past, like the rain that fell outside, constant, inevitable, but never staying for long. Maybe that was the beauty of it all. Part 12. The Quiet Between. It had been months, maybe even longer, since I had seen him last. We hadn't spoken, not really. There had been no more letters, no more unexpected visits to the bar. Yet, somehow, neither of us had really let go. There was something in the silence between us, something that felt heavier than words. I never reached out, and I never expected him to either. But I kept tabs on him, in small, quiet ways. LinkedIn, mostly. I didn't know why I wasn't really looking for anything specific. It wasn't as if his projects would offer me anything but a reminder of what could have been. But there I was, scrolling through his updates, watching his career grow, just as I had always imagined it would. It was strange watching someone you thought you'd lost track of, watching them live the life they were meant to live, even though you weren't part of it anymore. But that's the thing about time, isn't it? It doesn't really let you move on, not completely, even if you try to. And then there were the little moments, like when I would find that a like had appeared under one of my old blog posts. It was always subtle, just a heart or a thumbs up, nothing more. But somehow, I knew. It was him. In his quiet way, he was still there. Still watching from the shadows, still, in his own way, participating in the life I had built without him. I couldn't explain it, really. It was like we had both settled into this quiet space where we could still acknowledge each other, but without ever having to speak. Like ghosts, quietly brushing against each other, sharing the same air, but never fully acknowledging one another. I remember the first time I saw his name on my blog. It was as if the past had suddenly come rushing back to me in that one simple gesture. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, unsure whether I should feel comforted or unsettled. It had been so long since we had last really talked, since we had last shared anything real. But his like was enough. It was enough to make me think, for a moment, that maybe we hadn't drifted so far apart after all. But life moves on, doesn't it? We both kept our distance, quietly watching the other from the sidelines of our own lives. He was still there, in the background, the faintest trace of him lingering on my blog, on my LinkedIn feed, in the parts of me I didn't know I was still holding on to. But neither of us ever took that step forward, never crossed that invisible line we had drawn for ourselves. I can't say I'm sure why I kept looking. Maybe it was because, in some quiet part of me, I wanted to make sure that he was okay. I wanted to know that he was still out there, still living, still breathing, even if I wasn't part of his world anymore. Maybe I just needed that reminder, like a thread that ties you to something, even when it feels like the thread is breaking. I had always imagined that he would keep an eye on me, too, that he would always be there, even if it was just in the most distant way. But then I had to ask myself, what did it all mean? What was this silent connection we had? Was it something we had built, or something we had both simply failed to tear down? I suppose I'll never know for sure. Maybe it was just the way things were always meant to be between us, never quite finished, never quite forgotten, always lingering in that quiet space where words were unnecessary. I'm not sure. I sometimes think about reaching out, just to see what would happen. But then I remember how we used to be, how we were before the silence, before the distance. I remember how much it hurt to let go of him, even when I knew it was the right thing to do. And I wonder if I could bear to open that door again, even just a crack. Or if we both moved too far to ever really cross that line again. For now, I suppose I'll just keep watching, just like he keeps watching me. Maybe one day, when the time is right, one of us will step forward. Or maybe, we'll stay in this quiet between us, where everything feels both close and impossibly far away. Either way, it's a place where we remain, at least for now. Part 13, The Illness and the Call. From the bar tab that was paid twice. It was early spring when my mother fell ill. The kind of illness that doesn't knock gently but barges in, rearranging everything you thought was steady. I remember the way the hospital room smelled sterile and sour, like bleach mixed with fear. My hands shook when I signed forms. I forgot to eat. I spoke too softly to doctors who spoke too quickly in return. Everything became a blur. Days folded into nights, and sleep was something I watched other people do. My bar ran without me. I stopped writing. I stopped checking anything. The world narrowed down to my mother's hospital bed and the dim light above it. And then, one evening, when I sat outside the hospital on a bench that was too cold, with my coat half-zipped and a stale vending machine coffee in my hand, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Almost. But I looked. His name. Not a call. Just an email. The subject line was simple, "Thinking of you." I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. My thumb hovered. Something about seeing his name there, in the middle of all the noise and grief and exhaustion, made me feel as though the air had changed. Like it had softened, just slightly, around the edges. The message was brief. Kind. No grand gestures, no apologies or reopenings of old doors. Just a note saying that he'd heard somehow that my mother was unwell, and he was sorry. That if there was anything I needed, even just someone to listen, I could reach out. That was all. And yet, it wrecked me. I didn't cry when the doctors explained her diagnosis. I didn't cry when I had to call my brother and tell him to fly in. But sitting there with that email open, under the dim hospital courtyard light, I cried. Big, shaking, silent sobs. Because it reminded me that someone out there still saw me, even when I felt invisible. I never asked how he knew. Maybe one of our mutual friends told him. Maybe he just saw it in the subtle clues I left online without meaning to. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd written. And so, against my better judgment, I replied. Just a short thank you. Nothing emotional, nothing too open. But I told him it meant something. That it helped, just to be reminded that someone I once loved could still care, even from a distance. We exchanged only a few emails. Polite. Careful. But there was something in the way he phrased things, gentle, unassuming, that made me remember why I had once trusted him with my secrets. And something in the way he asked about my mother, not just asking how she was, but how I was, made me feel less alone. During the worst of her illness, I would scroll through our short email thread on the nights I couldn't sleep. Just those few lines, passed back and forth like two people waving to each other from opposite sides of a river. It was enough. I didn't tell anyone about those emails. It felt like a secret, not because it was wrong, but because it was precious. Like a soft light in a dark hallway. When Mom took a turn for the worse, he wrote again. "I'm here if you need to talk," he said. That was it. No pressure. No expectations. Just an open door. And I almost stepped through it. Almost. But something inside me was afraid. Not of him, never really of him, but of what that door might lead to. I had barely kept myself together as it was. Still, his presence lingered, wordless, invisible, but real. A kind of echo in my days. A shadow beside my grief. It wasn't love, not anymore. But it was something. Something that tethered me gently to the past, and reminded me that not everything had disappeared. That some things remain, even if you never speak them aloud. Part 14, That 1 hour in winter. From the bar tab that was paid twice. It was late January. The kind of winter that bites at your fingertips no matter how deep you tuck them in your pockets. The city was gray, quiet, a little softer than usual, like it, too, was holding its breath. He emailed me a week in advance. Said he'd be back in town briefly. His mother's health wasn't great, and he wanted to spend a few days with her. Then, almost as an afterthought, "If you're free, maybe we could walk a bit. Just for old times." I said yes. Not immediately. I waited a day. Thought it through. Replayed our last few emails in my head. But I knew even before I typed my reply that I would say yes. We met in front of the old bookstore on Hawthorne Avenue. I don't know why we chose that spot. Maybe because it hadn't changed. Or maybe because we had, and needed somewhere steady to anchor us. He looked older. So did I. But there was something familiar in the slope of his shoulders, the way he smiled when he saw me, that made time feel like a soft loop rather than a straight line. We didn't hug. We just started walking, our feet falling into rhythm on the frosted sidewalk. For 1 hour, we wandered through the winter. Past the little park where we used to sit with coffee. Past the bench where I once told him a secret I hadn't told anyone else. We didn't talk about the past. Not directly. But it hovered in the spaces between our words, like the visible puffs of breath between us. He told me about his mother. How she started forgetting things, slowly at first, then all at once. I listened, nodding, my gloved hands tucked into my coat. I told him about the bar, how it still stood, how the jukebox sometimes played songs we once danced to without knowing what they'd come to mean. There was no urgency between us. No pressure to fill the silence. Just the wind, the scrape of our boots, and the shared warmth of something once held. We laughed once about a memory we both remembered differently. It wasn't a loud laugh. More like a shared breath, something soft and cracked open just enough. At one point, he touched my arm to guide me past a patch of ice. His hand was steady. The kind of gesture you don't think about unless you haven't felt it in a long time. We stopped at a street corner near the river. The light hadn't changed, but neither of us moved. "This was good," he said, quietly. "I'm glad we did this." "Me too," I replied. And I meant it. There were no declarations. No promises of next time. Just that hour. Just the two of us, wrapped in scarves and silence, walking through a city that used to know our story. When we parted, it was simple. A soft smile. A wave. And then I turned and walked toward home, my footsteps the only sound in the snow. Later that night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, staring at the streetlights glowing through frost. That hour hadn't changed anything. And yet, in the smallest way, it had changed everything. Sometimes, all you need is a winter walk. 1 hour of shared breath in the cold. To remember that once, and maybe still, you mattered to someone. Part 15. The ring in the drawer. From the bar tab that was paid twice. It was a Sunday afternoon when I found it. One of those still, weightless days when everything in the world feels held in pause. The rain had stopped just an hour before, leaving behind a sky so pale it almost seemed embarrassed. I was cleaning out my desk not for any reason, really. Just the kind of idle ritual you do when your heart feels full and quiet. That old wooden desk had followed me through 3 apartments and more than a decade. Its drawers still carried the scent of cedar and faint hints of ink and old paper. I hadn't opened the narrow top drawer in years. Not the one with the broken handle, the one that always caught halfway. But something nudged me that day, some tender instinct, or maybe boredom with a hint of fate. I tugged, and it gave with a reluctant sigh. Papers shuffled. A postcard from Venice slid forward, along with a yellowed to-do list written in my own hurried script. And tucked into the far back corner, inside a folded napkin from that wine bar we once loved, was a small velvet box. I stared at it for a moment. It didn't look familiar. Not exactly. But it had his quiet handwriting written all over it somehow. That sense of small, meaningful things hidden in plain sight. I opened it. Slowly. Carefully. Inside was a ring. Thin. Simple. Silver, with a delicate engraving on the inside, just a tiny curve of script, until again. My breath caught. I hadn't expected to cry. Not from a ring. Not after all this time. But something about it, the quiet of it, the way it had waited, unlocked something too deep to name. He had left it for me. I was sure of it. Not when we were still speaking. Not in any moment where it might have been easy to understand. But sometime after. Perhaps on that last visit when he borrowed my pen and left his scarf behind by accident. He never said the words. But he had, in 1,000 gestures. And this was one more. A quiet love letter in metal. I slipped the ring onto my finger. Not my ring finger. The middle one. Where it wouldn't look like a promise broken, but rather, a memory honored. It felt light. Warmer than I thought it would. For a long time, I sat there at the desk, staring at the empty drawer, my hand resting beside the velvet box. I thought about all the words he never said about how some people aren't made for declarations but for small, deliberate signs. I used to think we hadn't finished. That our story had been paused halfway through a sentence. But maybe it wasn't unfinished. Maybe it was written in invisible ink. Only visible in quiet moments like this. Later that night, I went to the bar. Sat at my usual spot, ordered his favorite drink, and whispered a silent thank you. For the walk. For the ring. For the words unspoken, but still heard. Until again, I whispered to myself, feeling the silver warm against my skin. And maybe that was all love really was. Something that waits, patiently, in the drawers of our lives. Part 16, A Life That Went On. From the bar tab that was paid twice. I live alone now. But not the lonely kind of alone. More like a quiet, well-worn solitude. The kind you choose after you've tasted the noise of too much company, too many tangled evenings, too many almosts. My apartment sits at the edge of town, just far enough that I can hear the wind before I hear traffic. It's an old place with radiators that sigh like tired ghosts, and wooden floors that creak with memory. But I like it. I like how the light slips through the thin curtains in the afternoon and paints long shadows across the kitchen tile. I've made a habit of keeping things simple. A mocha pot on the stove. 3 plants by the window, one of them already dying, but valiantly. A record player that only works if you balance a spoon on its lid. Every Friday evening, I go to the bar. That same place with the dim lamps and the dark wood and the bartender who never asks questions. Same seat, 2 stools from the end. Same drink of whiskey, 1 rock, with a twist. I sit there for an hour, sometimes 2. I bring a book, or a notebook, or nothing at all. It's not about the drink anymore. It's the ritual. The small act of showing up for yourself in a world that forgets so easily. Some weeks, I think I see him. Just in the corner of my eye, a familiar posture, the way a coat folds at the elbow, or the sound of laughter that feels one breath too close. But it never is. And maybe that's a kindness. I've never told anyone about the ring. I keep it in my drawer, wrapped again in that old napkin, as if returning it to its original silence. But I wear it sometimes, when I feel a little fragile. When I need a reminder that love doesn't always vanish, sometimes it just changes shape. The bartender knows my order. He places it in front of me with a nod, never a question. Sometimes I imagine telling him everything. About the man who never quite left, and the life that kept going anyway. But I don't. There's a comfort in being anonymous. In being part of a place's background music. Some nights, I bring my journal. The one with pages filled in the quiet handwriting I use only when I'm writing for myself. He's in there. In phrases I can't say aloud. In lines that trail off mid-sentence, as if he might finish them for me one day. There's something about choosing to continue. Not moving on, exactly, but moving with. Carrying someone in the rhythm of your days. Like a song that plays softly beneath the noise of everything else. I don't expect him to return. I don't sit at that bar waiting. But I keep that space open, the way you leave a porch light on, not because you think someone's coming, but because you'd want them to find their way if they did. And so life goes on. In small rituals. In quiet evenings. In the steadiness of a bar stool beneath you and a glass in your hand that feels just heavy enough to remind you you're still here. Not broken. Not whole. Just real. And maybe that's enough. Part 17. The tab he left every year. From the bar tab that was paid twice. It was a Tuesday. Mid-October, and the air already smelled like leaves beginning to give up. I had turned 1 year older, not that I kept much count anymore. These days, birthdays felt more like a gentle nod from the universe than a celebration. I walked into the bar as I always did. The way you walk into a memory you've polished so often it gleams. My usual seat was free. It usually was. I took off my coat slowly, letting the warmth settle into my shoulders. Letting the light hold me the way it always did in this place. The bartender Mark met my eyes with something a little different that day. Not pity. Not surprise. Just a softness. He set down my drink without a word. I nodded, grateful. He wiped the counter in slow, idle circles, then leaned in just a little. He called again this morning, Mark said, like it wasn't he the first time. And I knew. Even before the rest of the sentence left his mouth. If she comes in tonight, he had said, tell her the tab's on me. I sat there for a moment, not speaking. Not blinking. Just letting the words hang between us like cigarette smoke. How many years had it been? Enough that my hair had more silver in it now than anything else. Enough that I'd stopped wondering if he remembered. And yet, every year, without fail, I didn't ask how Mark knew it was him. He just did. Some voices don't need introduction. Some names are spoken between lines, in the way someone exhales. He never asked if you came, Mark added gently. Just wanted to make sure, if you did. I looked down at the glass in my hand. Amber, warm, familiar. It tasted like memory and old songs and the space between two people who once almost had it all. It wasn't grand, what he did. There were no letters. No calls to me. Just this. A quiet kind of love that didn't ask to be noticed but left room for me, in case I ever needed to feel remembered. I wonder where he was each year when he called. If he paused after hanging up, thinking maybe just maybe I'd walk in. If he pictured me at the bar, the same drink, the same seat. Older now. Still carrying him, though softer. I never called back. Never tried to trace the number or ask for more. What would I even say? That I still sat in the place where we used to talk about books we never finished. That I wore the ring sometimes, even if only at home, just to feel something solid. Maybe love doesn't always need a stage. Maybe sometimes it just needs a quiet bartender, a well-polished counter, and a bar tab paid by someone who never quite left. I raised my glass, just slightly. Not for a show. Just enough. To you, I whispered. Wherever you are. And then I drank. The warmth slipping down my throat like an answer I didn't ask for. Part 18, the last page in the diary. from the bar tab that was paid twice. The rain had returned. Not the kind that storms through, but the soft sort. The kind that whispers on window panes like a memory trying not to fade. I sat at the bar, the same place, the same hour. My drink was half finished, the warmth humming low in my chest. And beside me, my old diary lay open, worn at the edges. The leather soft from years of being carried more than read. The little receipt was tucked between 2 pages again. The one that started all this. Faded ink. The date circled in blue pen like someone had once meant to come back to it. It was strange how something so small could hold so much. How one act of quiet love, repeated, could echo through time long after the last phone call. Long after the last goodbye. I flipped to the final page. The very last. Blank until now. My hand moved slowly. Careful not to rush. Ink met paper with the kind of stillness reserved for sacred things. And I wrote his name. Just that. No explanation. No date. No flourish. It didn't need one. Outside. The rain sighed against the glass. People passed under umbrellas, shadows in motion. But in here, time had slowed. Folded in on itself like a love letter tucked back into its envelope. Mark had already turned down the lights. The last song on the playlist was playing. Something soft with a piano that felt like a lullaby only grown ups remember. I traced his name with my fingertip. Once. Twice. The way you do when you know you won't need to again. And then I said it out loud. If I could live it again. My voice barely louder than the rain. I wouldn't change a thing. I closed the diary. Let it rest on the counter like a book that had finally reached its ending. The glass was empty now. But I didn't ask for another. My heart felt full in a way no drink could mimic. I leaned back slightly. Let my head rest against the wood-paneled wall. The hush of the bar embraced me, wrapping around the edges of thought like a soft blanket. And then I closed my eyes. Not because I was tired. Not because the day was over. But because there, in that quiet space between memory and moonlight, I felt him. Like a hand brushed gently across the back of mine. Like a whisper only I could hear. I smiled. And drifted into sleep.